One, two, three.
The following audio exclusive features the entire uncut interview with NDN Collective's Director of Racial Equity, Sunny Redbear of the Lakota Nation. Excerpts of this interview were included in our recent special, Landback, a Tipi Town Approach to Healing Homelessness. In the special feature, Laura traveled to the sacred Black Hills of South Dakota, where NDN Collective is reclaiming ancestral lands to address homelessness, addiction, and violence against Native Americans. She reported on Camp Mniluzahan, a teepee village built on tribal trust land that welcomed hundreds of unhoused Indigenous people and others in the Rapid City area in the dead of winter last year.
I'm Laura Flanders, and I'm speaking to you, I think, from Muncie Lenape land here in almost the Delaware River Valley.
Awesome. Yeah, my name is Sunny Redbear, and I am the Director of Racial Equity at NDN Collective. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am Mini Koju and Hukpapa Lakota from the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe in north central South Dakota. That's where I grew up, very small town. I've been an advocate for many years. So just kind of stepping into a new role as director and trying to use my skills in that way. So
let's start by talking about Creek Patrol. What was it? Why was it needed? And how did you get involved?
Yeah, Creek Patrol is still going. It's just such an amazing community mutual aid effort that was started by 6 people that just saw a need in our community. This need has existed from, time immemorial of just being good relatives to each other. But we see that more and more with our unhoused relatives is that they need support, they need protection, and they need people to advocate for them. And there's a lot of gaps in services wherever you are, whatever city you reside in. And so Creek Patrol was kind of a call to action, as you will, by a group of individuals that just saw that need and that went out there and just did the work, which so many times we get like caught up in that bureaucracy, right? Like we're like, we got to figure this out. We have to have this plan. We have to have like all our ducks in a row. And what they did was they just went out there and did the thing. And it was pretty amazing. So Creek Patrol has constantly evolved and become a community safety group, basically. And so just really lucky to be a part of it. They started over a year ago now. And I came into Creek Patrol about 3 months later. And yeah.
Who needed safety and from whom?
So our unhoused relatives, we have a history of our people living along the Rapid Creek. The Rapid Creek is where Rapid City got its name from. And it was called Mniluzahan, which is swift or rapid water. And many of our relatives gravitate towards that, right? Like water's life, it has energy, there's safety in it. And so a lot of our unhoused relatives stay along that creek and that's their home, and so they Creek Patrol would walk a route right near the creek. It's about 4.5 to 5 mile route that they would walk every single evening and just make sure that they had basic needs. Do you need a blanket? Do you need water? We have food. Check on them, see if they need any medical attention. And also making sure that they're not being harassed. There's a lot of harassment along that creek when people know that these people are vulnerable and then also know that there's no repercussions or consequences to actually inflicting harm or violence on the unhoused. And so we saw that a lot. They were kind of the victims to people's aggression much of the time. And so, they would oftentimes just make sure that, sometimes they would roll up on people and check on them and they had just gotten beat up, or like we would come up on them and like they were in the middle of a conflict. And so just making sure that people were safe, that they got the medical attention they needed, and then also just like protecting them from people harassing them. And the violence that was inflicted on them was from a number of people, like everywhere from like teenagers to older or middle-aged, white males. Like, it was just very interesting to just see the different dynamics that played out over there.
What was Camp Mniluzahan able to do that city services weren't doing?
Oh, wow. There's the list. I think the biggest thing is that we saw them as relatives, that we saw them as humans. They weren't just a number, that we weren't getting funding for them. But that it provided a safe space for them to be. I think so many times that, like, within our cities, within our communities, there's not many places to actually be and exist without feeling that you have to buy something or commit to something, right? And so camp was an opportunity to not only come for safety, to come sleep, get a meal, get warming items, create connections with other people in the community, but that it was literally a place for them to just be. And I think that is something that we lose sight of much of the time, is that, like, we think that when you become unhoused, that you somehow lose the ability to make decisions for yourself. And I think that when you provide a space for people to self-govern and to step into their self-determination, and when you actually trust them to do that, they do. And they just need a little bit of space to do that. So
Hermes described first seeing the camp, and I talked about how it felt being there. Even myself, you could feel the energy there. Mm-hmm. What's your keenest memory of Camp Mniluzahan once it got started? How did it sound, smell?
Oh man,
look like, feel like? How did you feel?
So I'm imagining wearing my overalls. I wore these gray overalls like every single day, because we were like literally in it, right? The smell of burning wood, of wood stoves. You would walk around and, like, that crisp winter air. It's just like this fresh air, and you're surrounded by the Black Hills. You're surrounded by trees, by the land. It was such a beautiful, and although it was challenging, beyond challenging, it was like one of the best experiences of my life. And it pushed me to it pushed me outside of my comfort zone. It pushed me to a limit of like connecting with people on a whole different level. And so for me, that experience was life-changing for me. And when you arrived at camp, like, everybody, like, there was no hierarchy. There was no, like, this person is in charge and, like, we have to listen to this person. It was like this community of, like, just wanting to take care of each other. And it was just really beautiful. I mean, it didn't, there was the challenges and, like, the things that we had to work through, but it was really amazing to see what happens when people truly commit to taking care of each other and making it work. I think that's one of the biggest things was that, the difference between the city services, that it wasn't institutionalized. It wasn't like, a lot of the city services, when you step in, like, your foot in those buildings, it feels like jail. It's like the white walls, the brick walls, the locked doors, you got to hand over your items to this person who may give them back. There's no, yeah. And I just think that camp was just like a really beautiful experience of connecting to the land. And that was probably the most important part for myself and for the relatives too.
Can you talk a bit more about that? I mean, outside of the white walls and the white people and handing everything over, mm-hmm. At the camp, can you talk a little bit about how reclaiming land and reclaiming heritage, including your heritage and identity, connected for you?
Yeah, I think that, for me, I was adopted when I was 2 days old, and I grew up in a non-native family, and I eventually ran away when I was 17 years old, and I connected back to my culture, which I was not allowed to do growing up. And so I've been immersed in my culture for many years now. And what I see though is that because of colonization, because of assimilation, so many of our unhoused relatives are actually those that are victims of, boarding schools, or the grandchildren of boarding school survivors. And what I saw was that we inherently have and carry this knowledge with us of our culture, of who we are, our identity. And many times we're not allowed to live that out in everyday spaces. And what I saw was that, many times, like there's so many of us that were at camp that were a part of camp and upholding camp, that we didn't have training. We didn't like, go into like Camp Mniluzahan training and like learn how to take care of each other. Like it was like this inherent knowledge that we carried with us. And I think that like what that allowed us to do is, like, for one, connect to the land, which I felt like was very, very important. But also it created like this system of accountability and like relying on each other and finding purpose within camp. And just being in the land, being away from things that are distracting us from really truly connecting to each other, I thought was really powerful. And it was also that like camp was away from a lot of it was away from the stores, away from like being in the city. And so what that did was like it just created like this respite, like peaceful place that we could be and literally hear nothing, and at night we could look up and see the stars. And it was like those moments in time when you're like, wow, there's so much more out there. So
it seems, I don't want to say ironic, it seems poignant perhaps that that the land connects to that boarding school story.
there's a boarding school in Rapid City where that was really right directly near where Camp Mniluzahan existed. And really, when we talk about the creek, our relatives used to make camp along that creek because they wanted to be closer to the children in the boarding schools. The buildings actually still exist. They're now a hospital, but the boarding schools, when we talked about the creek, our relatives would camp along that creek. And that there's a long, like when I talk about the history, that was part of the history. It was called Oshkosh Camp. And the parents and the families would come and camp there in order to be closer to the children in the boarding schools. There's just that connection. There's this connection of displacement, of colonization. And what was interesting too is that Oshkosh Camp was also relocated. They were forcibly removed from the creek as well. And then they got pushed north of town and got put in the middle of nowhere that had no food. They had no running water, no nothing over there as well. And so it's just like this long history of constantly being displaced. And now we have our unhoused relatives that are over there, and the city does their sweeps and they take their blankets and they take their items. And so, yeah, like when we talk about Camp Mniluzahan, that is a direct reclamation of our lands. That is tribal trust land. That is an opportunity. And also, how do I want to say it? It's a teaching moment of what could happen. We're envisioning what could be if we actually had control of our lands and what it would mean to have land back. And so we were on this piece of sovereign territory that where we not once in 8 months called police. We didn't need more policing. We didn't need people to come up and criminalize those that are struggling. And what that did was it gave us an opportunity to self-govern, to govern ourselves and work through and de-escalate and do all the things that we needed to do in order to keep a healthy environment for our relatives. And we were able to do that. And it's all through relationality that so many people forget about. We forget about creating relationships within our communities, with the people that we live next to our neighbors. And so camp is a direct example of what could be. Granted, it was not perfect, but man, if you could just imagine what that would be like in a community that is, for one, resourced, connected to the land, has that relationality, putting people first, people above property, right? And yeah, and supporting each other. So
we've talked a little bit about racism, colonialism, capitalism. What about patriarchy and gender-based violence? How do you integrate that into this story and into your work there at NDN?
that just goes hand in hand with being a good relative. I think understanding the roles that we play and making those very clear. I think when we talk about creating a space where our unhoused relatives can be heard, it's not just our unhoused relatives, it's everybody. It's creating this equity and equality across the board, right? That everybody's idea matters. And that's one thing that we really strived for at camp was we would have camp meetings where, like I said, there was no hierarchy. There was no you are like, these are our ideas and you need to listen to us. It was like we sat together and we listened to the unhoused relatives of how are things working? Like, what would you change? What would you like? What are your ideas? And I think that naturally what happened is that when we talk about patriarchy and that colonization, like that kind of falls to the wayside as we start trusting each other and understanding our roles. And when we understand our roles, we create purpose. And when we have that purpose, like people are driven to do the thing that they know how to do in order to like help the relatives at camp. I think that Native people oftentimes we're always like pushing against something or we're fighting something, and sometimes we forget to just embrace like who we are and what we inherently know. And so I think that at camp, that's how we stepped into those roles, and then also making sure that people's voices are heard and really tapping back into that matriarchal mindset, of really caring for each other.
This is a crucial story for Native people, but is it only a story for them, for you?
No, not at all. I think that this is an example of what this means to not only be a good ally, but to really give us spaces and when we talk about decision making, allowing us to be a part of those things. Like, we know what's best for ourselves. Each person knows what's best for themselves, and being able to allow ourselves to trust that. And so when we talked about Camp Mniluzahan, this was a community effort. It was a mutual aid effort that like spanned across cultures, but really understanding that this is our Indigenous land. This is where our ancestors come from. And like for us to connect to that was more of healing on our part, right? But once we heal ourselves, like we're healing our community. And so we had many people that donated supplies, donated meals, donated their time to really learn and come and see what it looks like to be able to create something like this. And so just really fortunate to feel so supported in this project, in this community that we built.
I guess I just think that there's an awful lot of people that will be resonating with your story as you just described it, of reconnecting with other people and with land who aren't anything to do with Indigenous, or may not think of themselves that way, but have that same sense of dislocation, disconnection, alienation.
Yeah.
It's particular, but it's not unique.
Right. Yes.
So to people elsewhere who perhaps face some of the same challenges, Native people and others, how can they do what you've done? Can they do what you've done, what you're engaged in doing? How can they pick up the campaign of Landback?
Yeah, absolutely. Landback is just like one of the campaigns from NDN Collective, right? And it's huge. It's a lot to carry. But what I learned, I think the most, is how powerful my two hands were. Being able to really just stop questioning everything, stop questioning, am I allowed to do this? Can I do this? Do I have the skills to do this? And just really just going out there and doing what you can with what you have. And I think that anybody can do that. And you're going to make a difference, and you're going to make an impact. And if not, just not for your community, but for yourself, and understanding what it is to connect to other people, and understanding what it is to build empathy within yourself, and those teachable moments. For me and my campaign, I have a racial equity campaign that is very much focused on our unhoused relatives. And one of the things that we're working on right now is actually building a toolkit for other communities to start their own camps. And what that would look like for you, this is just like, it's a template. It's like, this is what we did. If you don't want to reinvent the wheel, this is how we did inventory. This is how we had donation drop-offs. This is what we asked for in donations. These are the meals that we cooked. These are the contracts that we made, all the things that we had to learn on the spot. We were like, every single day was like conflict resolution. It was like brainstorming on like, we don't have running water. Okay, now what do we do? Well, we get a 450 gallon water tank that we fill every 2 days. Well, how do we keep it from freezing? All of these things that would just like come up sporadically, and we were just like, solving them on the spot. Well, we're creating a toolkit so that people don't have surprises like that, But the biggest part of the toolkit for me is starting to create that conversation. What Camp Mniluzahan did was provided a home for our unhoused in these 8 months. But the bigger thing that it did, it challenged people's thinking of like what is possible and what people are comfortable with. I mean, when we had Camp Mniluzahan, our community was uncomfortable. They were so uncomfortable with a bunch of Native Americans up on this hill on sovereign land, and we can't even go up there because we don't have the rights to go up there. And like, what are they doing? And they're going to set the hills on fire. Like, oh my gosh, all these things, and here we are up there just like connecting and healing. But what that does is it pushed people out of their comfort zone in order to like start learning and evolving your thinking outside of the city services, outside of governmental funding, and really puts it back in the hands of the community. What can we do with, in our communities? And so that's something that we're doing right now, is creating that toolkit for people that either live on tribal land or are not on tribal land. People are going to have to do their research on like what their ordinances and their policies are within their city. But that doesn't mean like not pushing the limits. I think that these things need to be challenged. They have to be challenged in order for things to change. So
it seems like we're getting that message from every place, that we've gotten lazy about letting other people do stuff badly, that we actually need to do ourselves more and better. Just to come back to you for a second, you mentioned a little bit of your own story. And as we think of the community, the unhoused community, the people that we have in our towns and cities and rural areas, what are the special challenges, or are there special challenges that unhoused Native women and girls face when they're in that situation? And how do you address that? And how can we address that?
It's a loaded question for sure. For me, growing up, there were times in my life when I was unhoused. My mom was an unhoused person. And so I grew up trying to figure out how to care for her and love her in the best way possible, knowing that she was choosing this lifestyle at some points. And maybe it wasn't necessarily her choosing it, it was her trauma, right? Telling her what she deserved or what she didn't deserve. And so I think the challenges is that so many times we get into like the relatives and our unhoused that have accepted what life has given them, and their trauma has allowed them, and like Stockholm syndrome and all those things like have told them what they deserve. And I think that it's really hard for them to get out of that. It's hard for them to realize like, hey, like, I know that this will, make do, but like, you actually deserve this, right? And so trying to convince them and like teach them like what they should expect from other people and expect as far as treatment. I also think that, because of the traumas, unhoused and houselessness is just a symptom, that there's all these root causes of why these people are there in the first place. And so many times, it's kind of like that picture of the iceberg, right? where you see the tip of the iceberg. You just see unhoused people that are, fighting addictions, but then down below, you don't see all of the historical trauma that they carry, or the trauma they've experienced in their own lifetimes. And so I think that when we start thinking about that area, we start thinking about women and girls, and how not only are they put and created these vulnerable situations for them, but they are literally targeted. And they're targeted for many reasons. A lot to do with the lack of accountability and consequences of mistreating, killing, murdering, kidnapping women and girls. And I don't want to just say women and girls, because it happens across the board. But we have a movement called MMIW, which is the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. I've worked with them and in that movement for several years. And that's where I first came into activism, as you will. And man, it's heavy. There's so many things that tie into it, and so many things that are like so parallel to the relatives that are unhoused, right? Oftentimes we think like, oh, they're vulnerable, but no, they oftentimes are targeted because of their situations. And so, for one, just being mindful of those things. We have to have situational awareness all the time. We have to start, taking notes within our own phones of hey, this person's missing. Are we able to help check in on them? Like, have we seen them? And Creek Patrol does a lot of that work. Many times we get a lot of messages from relatives of saying, hey, they have accepted that they have unhoused relatives within their family, but they want to check in on them and they don't know how to do that. So they'll contact us and say, hey, this person, my sister, I haven't seen her or heard from her in a week. And so we get a picture and we put it into our group chat and say, hey, let's look out for this person. But oftentimes in this last year, there was 43 people now that have passed away that are unhoused in like our small community, and there are people that are missing. Some of the people that were at camp that we knew very well, that were like family to us, are missing. And yeah, we've had community searches, we've had dogs come in, and we've tried to do everything we can, but understanding that there are predators out there that take advantage of these people and their situations. And so
I remember when I was there in whatever that was, July, and the Red Road came through the Totem Pole journey, and I think it was one of the tribal leaders there from the town said that in the previous 3 months there'd been like 15 women and girls disappeared. I mean, maybe it was just girls disappeared, maybe taken. It's just the numbers. People outside have no idea how prevalent. So to end on a more positive note, the changes that you're working on and the challenges that you're working to address and addressing in your work are enormous. We've named huge historic ones, and as you just described, it's multiple, diverse, interconnecting, deep, heavy. I often end the show by asking our guests, when in their lives have they experienced something or met somebody or been somewhere that gave them the sense that the changes that you're seeking, aren't just possible, but are actually palpable. Have you ever had a feeling of the change you want to see?
Yeah, no, I think that was every day at camp. I think that's also every day that I see the relatives and like we recognize each other. And just the other day, try not to get emotional, a couple of weeks ago. So it's funny because we always joke around about like everybody had their favorite at camp. Like, there's this person you just connect with and they're your favorite. And so I had my favorite, and his name was Sheldon. And I ran into him on the street the other day, and he came up to me, and it was at night, and I had just got done eating at a restaurant, and I came out and was walking across the street with some friends, and he had his head down, and he was like, ma'am, do you have any spare change? And I was like, I looked at him and I said, Sheldon. And he looked at me and he just started crying and he just grabbed me. And he said, Sonny, I didn't know if I'd see you again. And where have you been? And I've been looking for you. I've been praying I run into you. And we just hugged each other and we're both just bawling. And in those moments, it's a sense of connection that it's like on that human level of just needing people. And I think that was every day at camp. And I see that every day, like as I go downtown and I see our unhoused and I pass by them on the street when I'm driving, I'm like, oh, there's Mary and there's Gilbert, and, and then stop and check on them and be like, hey, are you guys good today? Like, do you guys need anything? And I think that is the type of change that I see when we talk about theory of change. Oftentimes we're thinking like organizational, like we talk about projects and all that stuff, but we forget that the theory of change happens within ourselves. It happens within ourselves every time that we're experiencing something new and a new way to connect to people. And I think that is what's going to change the world. That's what's going to change the situations for people in our communities and our families. And those are the things that continue to drive me to do the work that we're doing. Is like, I'm not looking for that boom, big bang, like change, like all of a sudden we wake up and like racial equity, like what I'm looking for is that connectivity, is that heart to heart type stuff that gives me what I need to like keep moving forward. And literally if it's just one person, it's worth it. And so, yeah, I think that those are my moments. Those are my moments of knowing that like I'm on the right track, that I'm fighting for, like knowing what I'm fighting for and knowing that it's possible and continuing to be motivated to do that.
Well, I think you just gave a whole bunch of people that moment in this day and in the days that they will see this show.